how do these sanctions compare to previous ones?
Well, there have been sanctions, US sanctions, on the Syrian government since 2004, and those were stepped up in 2011. Similar things ever since the beginning of the Syrian civil war, initially trying to put pressure on President Assad, initially to step down for regime change, and then that changed over the years. But what they're trying to do now, the US government seems to have accepted that President Assad is not going to step down immediately. We're not going to see an immediate change of government, but they do still want some other things to happen. They want to pressurize President Assad's government to stop the air campaign against Syrian civilians that's been conducted by their allies, the Russian military. They also want them to enable the safe return of refugees, and they want unfettered access for humanitarian organizations across the country to help people living in Syria. Those are just some of the key things they're calling for. And what they're trying to do with these sanctions is individually target people inside and outside Syria, individuals, companies, organizations that in any way are seen to be sponsoring President Assad's government. They're even considering whether or not the Syrian central bank could be seen as laundering money for President Assad. So they're hoping that by increasing the sanctions in this way, they will be able to mount pressure on President Assad's government to change the way that it acts in the country. And as you heard before, that will include both sanctioning organizations in Iran and Russia, including the governments that are supporting President Assad there. So it's simply an increase to try and change the way that President Assad is conducting himself and conducting his government, because of course we've seen these efforts at normalization of his government over the last few years. We've seen other actors coming in, for instance, the Damascus Trade Fair last year, where actors came in from the UAE to start up trade talks again. The US government wants to try and stop that and say you cannot do business with Syria unless you want to suffer for it.
And Leila, what are the repercussions likely to be where you are in Lebanon?
Well, of course, one of the main issues here is that Hezbollah, which is one of the organizations that has been helping President Assad in his campaign in Syria as the foot soldiers there on the ground, is based in Lebanon. And so, of course, we've seen over the last year the US trying to sanction increasingly actors who are also linked to Hezbollah. So this works for them in two ways, because it also means they're increasingly sanctioning Hezbollah as they sanction President Assad's government. So Hezbollah's facing problems there because, of course, many of their sources of finance are from external countries, and we've already seen people in many countries in Europe and North America being sanctioned for their involvement with Hezbollah as an organization. But one of the key issues is the border between Lebanon and Syria, because the thing there is that it's a very porous border. So currently Lebanon has strong links with Syria. There's a lot of smuggling that goes on there, as well as legal trade. And so what the US wants to try and do is firm up that border. But the problem for Hezbollah is that will make things increasingly difficult for them to get weapons across the border, which is so important for their operations in Syria. However, one thing that NGOs are very worried about is that they don't want these sanctions to affect legitimate farmers and traders in Lebanon who use Syria as their only route to get their products to the mainland, because, of course, the Israeli border to the south is closed. So they want to make sure it doesn't affect civilians. It just affects those actors who are helping President Assad's government, and there is concern here over that.
Thank you very much, Leila.